Hello and welcome to this game review. So this was quite an interesting game. First, White started by doing some kind of nonsense, and Black developed very sensibly, getting all the pieces into the game, gaining some space on the queen side as well. And now, after f3, Black is more or less positionally winning because all of White's pieces don't really make sense. There's a weak knight on g3 as well, so eventually we should find a way to just break through, and intuitively it seems e4 just kind of reaches some kind of breakthrough, because at least some pawns will be exchanged, and with all our pieces developed and White's pieces not really making sense, the king in the center, we should eventually look for ways to open up the position. But the problem here is Black played d4, which closed up the position. And now White's pieces don't really make sense, but he didn't really do anything particularly wrong, so he is in time to consolidate. For example, castles, he can move the knight away somewhere, maybe play f4, and we'll have some kind of King's Indian type defense opening. And our bishop on b6 doesn't really make sense, it has been closed down. The usual plan would be c5, c4, but now we have made it very difficult for us to implement this plan. So there was no reason to release the tension here. Of course, we could take here as well, and this probably makes more sense. The position would be a little bit symmetrical here, but we could try to open up the position further with moves like knight d4. The rook can go to d8, and here Black has an obvious advantage in piece activity and king safety. So now d4. So now a knight f5 is played, but this allows us to exchange the knights and then play h5, but we shouldn't really move pawns in front of our king so much, but I guess this works out. Now after g4, Black finds a nice continuation in e4, which definitely makes sense, as again we have a huge lead in development, and we are simply winning because of the king who is in the center. And White is more or less two rooks and a knight down, while all of our pieces are playing. His queen is also completely useless. So with such positions we should definitely be able to win. So now Black decided on e takes d3, and now we have won. Well, we haven't won a piece yet, but we probably are going to. There are many ways to play here. It seems we should already be looking for checkmates. For example, the check here is quite enticing, and here with 24 minutes we should definitely think for a little bit more, especially if we see that we did not win such a position. In later games, hopefully use a bit more time to find something very concrete. For example, queen g3 has only one move, and here I guess rook e5 kind of ends the game on the spot, because rook takes f5 is a threat of basically checkmate. So there's not really that much else to analyze here. e3 is almost checkmate, but after bishop e1, miraculously White is kind of still in the game. But okay, this is fine. And now rook takes e2, played in less than a minute, but this does require quite a bit of calculation. And you mentioned the engine says it's a miss. Well, it's a miss because it doesn't really even win any material. At the end of this, we have an advantage in king safety, right? But not much else. We didn't really win any material, right? So we must try to find a way to either win material or win with checkmate, something very concrete. And if queen g3 comes to mind, again improving the queen with tempo. And here rook e5, threatening rook takes f5, kind of just ends the game again, because if he takes, this is just checkmate, more or less. So this could be found. While the solution in the game, the engine still says it's winning, but it's like not very clear why this would be winning, because if White gets consolidated, if he gets developed, this won't be too bad. After rook a to f1, Black makes a mistake in knight b4. Mention you want to exchange the opponent's bishop because the position is open, but we have to understand that now we have this dark squared bishop, which is more or less a useless piece at this point, while White's knight is good at blockading the b4 pawn, and the king can go to c2 eventually to try to be safe. And White also has ideas of knight e4 or knight c4. Well, this bishop doesn't really have any ideas. Even if it gets activated somewhere, it's not clear where it's supposed to go. So this was a big miss by Black. Instead, we should again focus on the king and the weaknesses. For example, knight e7, we can go pick up this pawn to at least have a pawn advantage. We can also play c5, c4 to open up the opponent's king, improve the bishop somewhat, or knight d5 as well. Okay, knight b4, and white doesn't take the knight, so this was a big positional miss. And here after queen e5, black is now winning. Again, it's not entirely clear why, but it's mostly because of king safety and the potential to attack on the squares on e3, d3, and also this knight is still not really in the game. And this was probably the moment to play f6. Well, it is possible, and after this we can take the pawn. There is no real discovery here, and black should be better because of the king safety, and now we are actually even getting some pawns. Queen d3 is threatened, so black is basically winning. Queen g3, this is fine, but again, white is kind of defending. c5, b3, which was a nice move by white, stopping c4. Bishop c7, and here f6 is played. But this is why we study tactics. We must think from the opponent's perspective as well. In this position, especially, where else is he supposed to go, right? If here we are quite happy to probably exchange bishops and then play something like king f8 or queen or king f8 or queen h3 trying to attack here. But the checks, captures, and attacks. And we must always look for the opponent's checks, captures, and attacks. Turns out he can take here. This isn't the end of the world, but there was no reason to lose a pawn here. The opposition is objectively still winning, but at least during the game it probably wasn't very clear. And here black decided on a perpetual check after thinking again for only a minute. So you thought it was a draw, but again the king safety is a lot better for black. And there's a lot of ways to continue. You could try to use these squares maybe for the knight, as the opponent's knight is also quite bad. Probably there is this kind of concrete winning attempt with bishop to h2, which again is a move that should definitely be considered because it is a forcing move. It attacks the rook, creates a big threat. The rook has only one move, it turns out. Can give a check. The king cannot move, he has to block. And later we can play something like knight e5, knight c3, and it's not clear what white is supposed to do, right? It's hard to find a single move for white in such a position. So it's quite unfortunate to not evaluate this correctly. And when we're evaluating positions, king safety should be the top priority. And here it's clear that white's king is a lot less safe than black's. Black does have some ideas here, but we could improve the knight to not allow f6 either. So quite an interesting game. And the lesson is probably that when we calculate these rook e2 lines, we should find something concrete, because here this wasn't really concrete enough. You just exchanged two rooks for a queen, more or less, and it's not clear why this would be winning. Well, something like queen g3 and rook e5 is a threat of checkmate, right? So we should prefer something concrete. And when we have 23 minutes, we should sit there and think until we finally find something that is definitely winning, if you feel that the position should be winning.